6, so let's get the show off road. Hi, my name is Daphne Macklin. I am the researcher at the Coalition for California Welfare Rights Organizations, being assisted by our assistant and go-to person, David Aslanian. And this presentation is titled Money and Shelter, a focus on money. Next slide, please. Our training goals are to identify primary income maintenance programs for individuals and families and identify challenges that may disrupt available public benefit income streams, as well as identify specific income streams available to maintain housing or assist in accessing housing resources, primarily for families that are experiencing either homelessness or housing insecurity. Next slide, please. So you probably know already, but let me just sloppily start all over again. What is an income maintenance program? And generally, most of us who work in the legal services community have some idea. In terms of straight up explanations, it's legislatively or regulatorily created systems which are publicly administered and provide for qualifying individuals and families funds and resources for basic necessities, chiefly shelter, food, and clothing. Persons eligible for these benefits have specific legal rights to receive the benefits under specific rules that govern the conduct of the public agencies that administer the programs. Next slide. Now, by way of disclaimer, because there are lots of programs, this training will not cover, but will mention programs like foster care, refugee assistance, programs for immigrants and the undocumented. I will also mention programs for U.S. military veterans and their dependents and survivors, as well as public and private pensions. Not to discuss these programs, but to let you know, as advocates for dealing with housing and the need for income to support housing, to know what those resources may be. I will also discuss the Social Security programs in general terms, although to be quite honest, I'm a specialist, I know this stuff. However, but also not covered are the medical assistance programs, because I do not know those programs, but many of them are looking at housing and may have housing related components. So bottom line for this training is there are specialized resources, and you should direct yourself to those specialists in those areas, because they will know the ins and outs of these programs that I don't know yet. It's only so much I can know. Any questions so far? Okay. Next slide, please. So some key definitions when you are working in the area of homelessness and housing insecurity. First definition. Hi, Lindsay. Please feel free to unmute yourself, because there's just 5 of us, so we're a small person seminar, and if it's interactive, it'll be more fun for me. Anyway, so we were working on the definitions of adequate housing. Adequate housing is permanent shelter intended for human habitation that is physically and structurally sound and meets all appropriate housing codes and is affordable to the resident or occupant. Homelessness, on the other hand, is defined as lacking a fixed, permanent, nighttime address. Next slide. Housing insecurity is a somewhat newer descriptor and is defined as the description of most types of housing challenges, including difficulty finding affordable, safe, and good quality housing, having unreliable or inconsistent housing, living with persistent overcrowding, which is something we don't often think about in the 21st century in the United States, but which has been a problem for many years for communities such as families in living in the Chinatown area of San Francisco. And also, I believe there's similar issues in New York and Boston. So that persistent overcrowding is something that we used to think is a problem. Well, in many communities, it never went away. And finally, it is housing insecurity is defined as having household income where the monthly rent is more than 50% of your income. So, and household rent used to be just the money you paid the landlord, but now it is things like utilities, it is things like necessities like water, electricity, gas. So all of these things are now fitting into the definition of housing insecurity because, quite honestly, that's something we have not paid attention to for some time. And there's a citation at the bottom here, which will let you know where I got this quote from. And it's coming out of the recognition that for a great many people, in order to stabilize their income, actually increase their income to something where they can afford housing, they're having to get educated. And in the meantime, they are experiencing housing insecurity as students. Next slide, please. So the types of situations where a household cannot afford housing include natural disasters. And I think there's a t-shirt that says, it's sort of a checklist: California earthquake, wildfire, flood, tsunami. Also, we need to add to that public health emergencies. There are human-caused catastrophes, wars, rioting, economic collapse. A lot of people lost their housing as a result of the urban insurrections in the 1960s and 70s, and that contributed to a significant loss of housing resources. There are also personal challenges, including medical emergencies, long-term or chronic disabling conditions for an individual, a partner to an individual who may be working, or a family member. Particularly as problematic for many families is when a child is either born with a disability or a child becomes disabled. Worked with a client whose child survived a near drowning, was left quadriplegic, and caused a lot of challenges to that household. There's also being the victim of crime or theft. And then there's being a victim of individual or communal violence, including random violence, intimate partner violence, and family violence. Next slide. So the types of income maintenance programs I'm going to cover in this training fall into two types: insurance type programs and need-based welfare benefit programs. And it's important to remember an individual or a household may actually qualify for both types of these benefits. So it's good to know what the programs are and how they do or don't fit together. Any questions? Okay, next slide. So insurance type programs. Now, these are the programs that if you were sitting in social work school, these are the things that help the deserving poor. Anyone deserves to be poor? So let's look at things like veterans benefits, which are administered by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. The state of California has a very vigorous advocate program for veterans, and you should get to know those people who are doing that work in the communities where you're living and working. They can be very helpful. The veterans were probably one of the first groups to recognize homelessness in the 1990s for what it was, what was going to be a long-term permanent problem that was going to require some aggressive solutions to address. Public and private pensions. State of California, if work here in Sacramento, would about once a month come across a client who had just sort of fallen out of the system. And if I could get that person connected back to their public or private pension, I could pretty much guarantee at least getting them out of homelessness to a certain degree. And finally, one of the largest programs in the United States is the Social Security system. There are multiple programs under Social Security, the retirement program being the most generous that people work and pay into. There's also the disability program for people who have worked and need to leave the workforce because of their disability. And then survivors benefits for individuals who are the children, grandchildren, spouses, ex-spouses of people who are eligible for Social Security retirement benefits. Again, these are not need-based. They are, however, based on categorical eligibility for these insurance programs, which pay based on how much you paid into them. Next slide. Now, insurance type programs are generally, as I said, based on status or conduct eligibility. They may offer more generous benefits based on the participant's circumstances or qualifications, although sometimes the amounts can be quite low. They have limited continuing eligibility rules or standards. So, so your husband died when he was 67 and you had been married for over 10 years. Well, he didn't work real hard. He only qualified for $350 a month, but you get that. Hey, it's better than nothing. And often the insurance programs have either no or generous resource or asset standards based on the participant or qualifying individual's circumstances or qualifications. So generally the programs are generous, but they may not be that generous if you didn't really work long enough to generate a fair enough amount of income. So those are one of the things that you will want to pay attention to. Any questions on this? Okay, next slide, please. Now, on the other side of the relatively generous insurance-based programs are the often rather stingy need-based programs. These are welfare benefit programs. We've all heard of them. There's temporary needy assistance for needy families, also TANF or CalWORKS. The food stamp program currently going under the title SNAP or CalFresh. The general assistance or general relief program, which is for bad people who do bad things. And finally, the Social Security Supplemental Security Income Program, or SSI, which provides cash financial assistance primarily to people with disabilities who were unable to participate in the workforce because of the severity of their disability or the fact that they are either very young or a child with a profound disability. Next slide. Now, need-based programs in general feature strict categorical eligibility standards, a standardized payment based on individualized household need, including family size, strict continuing eligibility rules and standards. In other words, things you have to do to stay eligible, and then restrictive resource and asset standards. So very limited amounts of resources that you can have, very limited assets that you are able to own and still qualify for these types of benefits. Now, interestingly enough, someone can qualify for SSI and own a home, okay? We're not that cool, but we're close. So there are things about these programs that seem a little incongruous, and it's often important to learn how to make your way around their edges. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I find helpful in working with people who are working with homeless populations is creating a template that will allow you to understand a program kind of at a glance, sort of a one shape. And the way that I divided these up are, there is first the question of categorical eligible. That answers the question, who is eligible for this program? So let's use SSI as an example. Who is eligible for SSI? A person with a medically documented disability that prevents them from engaging in significant gainful activity. Asset or resource eligibility. For SSI, you cannot have income that exceeds the SSI limit. You also cannot have assets as an individual in excess of $2,000 and resource, or if you are a couple, $3,000, and you may not have other types of resources, and there's a list of those. In terms of conduct eligibility, the question is, what must you do as an applicant or recipient to maintain program eligibility for SSI? With SSI, it is submit to the regular medical evaluations to determine if you are able to work or not. And there's to provide documentation of your continuing financial eligibility for the program. Next question, or next slide rather. So these are the templates. We'll go through them quickly since there's not that many of us, and they're pretty straightforward. And these are also the principal programs that are providing income to people who are either homeless or who are severely housing insecure. The least favored of these programs in California is what's known as the County General Assistance or General Relief Program. These are authorized by California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 17,000 and its sequence. These are county, locally funded programs with the terminology of relieving and supporting the poor, if only. The funding source is local, so these rules can be crazy making. The counties develop these rules themselves, including the operating regulations. The primary populations served have shifted in the 40 years that I've been doing legal services. So in the 1980s, the average person that you saw general assistance was a guy somewhere in his 30s to maybe his 60s. May or may not have had, but probably did have some interaction with the criminal justice system, had limited resources and assets, and limited to no income, not much of a work history. That population has now shifted to middle-aged single adults, some much younger people who may or may not have disabilities, and married or committed partners who who do not have minor dependents, but all of them in this population have limited resources and assets and often limited opportunities for earnings. Now, it should be remembered that GA is a temporary provisional resource that is often a bridge for people until more secure sources of income, including employment, are actually available to them. The one good change is that GA/GR recipients in California are currently almost all eligible for CalFresh on a fairly unlimited basis because of some waivers. So it is possible for someone to have a little cash, although not very much, but they will have access to some food because of CalFresh. Next slide, please. The CalFresh program, also known as SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, will probably always be food stamps in the mind of the public. These are federal funds administered by the California Department of Social Services through the California Welfare Department, County Welfare Department agencies. So they kind of jointly administer this program. The population served are individuals and family units who meet qualifying resource and income levels. One of the things you will get in your packet is the latest edition of CCWRO's benefits chart, which gives you the general information about the size of grants and benefits. There's been an effort to increase food stamp eligibility and it's beginning to make a difference. I helped a client qualify for CalFresh in the last year, and she was totally amazed at how much easier it was to qualify for benefits than 10 years before, when she was the struggling young mother of disabled infants and all of the hurdles that she had to go through. Yeah. It's nice to see your work out and make it easier for people to get something that they need. The operational authority for the CalFresh program is in the California Department of Social Services Manual of Policies and Procedures, section 63,000 basically. And then the 22,000 section is the rules concerning hearings and when you have to fight with the welfare department to try to keep what you've got or get a little bit. So we have a question in chat. Okay, that was something that David published for us. Okay, so any questions about CalFresh? Yes, no, moving along. Next slide, please. Probably the program that is most widely used is the Social Security Supplemental Security Income, SSI program, with what is called the State Supplement, SSP. These are federal funds. They are administered, I'm not sure why this is saying this is incorrect. There are some components of the SSI SSP program that are administered by the California Department of Social Services, but for the most part, this program is administered by the Social Security Administration in its local district offices. Individuals and families who meet qualifying resource and income levels are eligible for this monthly benefit, which is directed at those members of the household who have met the medical standards of SSI for this particular program. Now, SSP is what's known as the State Supplement Program. And for many years, SSP in California was given to SSI recipients to replace the CalFresh benefits that they were no longer, they were not considered eligible for. About 5 years ago, they did in fact qualify for CalFresh under certain circumstances, and that has made a significant difference for many families by providing them with access for that one individual who was otherwise excluded from the household. So there are a few mistakes on this slide that I'm going to need to correct. Next screen, please. The actual Social Security SSI SSP slide just showed up, and here it is. So this is the principal funding source is federal with some state funding. It is administered by SSA itself. It is for adults and minor children with medically documented medical conditions, including mental health and developmental disabilities, limited resources and assets. Applicants and beneficiaries can range from newborns who may qualify for provisional benefits to persons at or beyond retirement age. So often when I started working as a legal services attorney, almost all of my clients who were women in their 60s got SSI. And often these were women who had not gone into the workforce until they were in their 40s or older. They had always dependent on a husband who may or may not still be there. And I think that if you look at the Social Security documentation, their demographics, you will see that many SSI recipients, older ones, are women who did not participate in the workforce, at least not for a significant period of time. Okay, next slide. And finally, I talk a little bit, I created a slide for the CalWORKS program, formerly TANF. Families with dependent children, as well as some minor children without parental or familial support, who only have limited to no resources or assets. There are some instances where a child is receiving CalWORKs, but their caretaker relative falls into a category of non-needy. And so grandma or uncle, or in many cases, often older siblings, are getting CalWORKs for younger brothers and sisters. Next slide. So I've created some functional problem sets. They're very simple. They're intended to help you think about what resources might be available for particular populations of people. Since there's so few of us, I thought we might want to work through these together. So let's move to the first one. Unmute yourself and let's work through this problem set together. Next slide. So, all right, you want to take about a minute to read this? And I'll start now. Okay. All right. Okay. So, somebody want to tell me what we've got here? Allison, Stephanie? Somebody want to talk about this particular potential client?
Sure. Well, so the first thing that's jumping out to me is the PTSD making it difficult for him to work regular jobs because he's having seizures.
Yes.
So it seems like he would be a candidate for SSI.
Possibly.
I know that general relief, you know, clients can get it whether they're employable or unemployable. Seems
Yes.
like he would fall into the unemployable category if his seizures are making it hard for him to work. So we should probably also look at getting him connected with GR until the SSI can come through.
Mm-hmm. Anything else jump out at you?
He was medically discharged from the Army. I don't know if he would still be eligible for any VA benefits or medical care from the VA.
Definitely worth looking into. Where did he spend most of his adolescence?
Foster care.
This
Right.
is
Foster
he's
care.
in foster care. Okay. And was he the victim of a violent crime?
Yes.
Okay. So David, next slide. I have the answers on that one. Okay. So the resources that might currently be available, definitely we've hit VA. Definitely we've looked at GA, which would include CalWORKs. Is there foster care? That's possible. VA, victim witness. And then there's other information that we might need from him. David, next slide. So the answers are definitely GA, GR, VA. He might also qualify for Medi-Cal because the new ACA Medi-Cal rules would cover someone like Toby. Other things are unemployment, temporary disability insurance, SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, and SSI. Why? Because there is a little known program within SSA which provides SSDI to individuals younger than 30 who have a work history. They only have to have 20 quarters as opposed to 40 quarters. And this can be a relatively generous benefit for someone who's young, especially if they qualify for a little SSI to go on top of that. So I asked this question, what other information should or could be developed about Toby? And we know he was in foster care. There are some foster care aftercare programs that need to be explored for this person. We may need to get some more information about his family. And I have had the honor of assisting someone with filing an application for victim witness benefits about 30 years after she had been severely beaten by her own father. So that is a set of resources that we don't necessarily think about the homeless as being victims of violent crime and that being the reason that they're homeless, but it could work. Anybody see anything else? Okay. All right, David, next slide. So this is the Salgado family, named after my best friend, Annie. And we take a minute to review this slide. Okay. So, Stephanie or Allison, what do you think you see here? Okay.
Well, so I'm not quite sure about the final question at the bottom, but it seems like Gabby's medical care could be paid for through Medi-Cal funds.
Yes.
And I know that CalAIM has certain funds that are available to low-income people for some housing needs. I just don't know that that would qualify for Nestor here because he's not the one who would be receiving the medical treatment.
Okay. What about general eligibility for CalWORKs for this household? It's an intact family, clearly, right? No, the Medi-Cal rule is you just need to want to go back home. Okay. Anybody see anything else? David, can you get us to the slide with answers? Yes, thank you. Okay. Definitely we're looking at CalWORKs housing assistance for this family. Definitely CalWORKs is a possibility. Gabby's stroke, depending on her work history, may qualify her for provisional benefits for SSDI or SSI, especially if the expectation is that she will be disabled for 12 months or more. Okay. And you can get SSI and CalWORKs. SSDI, that may be a little dicier. Now, Alice was born premature. This is the newborn. That child may qualify for presumptive disability under SSI, depending on other household income. Given this household, probably the answer is yes. SSI dependence benefits could be available for Nestor and the children if Alice has enough of a work history. Remember, it's not just the husband getting it. If the wife is the person who's disabled but has the work history for Social Security, the husband and children can receive it on her account. There's also California Family and Parenting Leave. There's WIC to help with feeding the kids. And there's also in-home support services for Gabby once she's gotten home. Now, with this family and almost any family, you really want to check for immigration status. You want to see if there's a child support case for the older child from a different relationship. And that child may have a father who's disabled and receiving either SSDI or veterans benefits, or Gabby herself could be a veteran. So there's a universe of things to take a look at. Anybody have any questions? Okay, next slide. And David, would you present this, please?
Yeah. Let me
So,
move the screen. Sophia, age 54, was living with her 14-year-old daughter, Courtney, and Terry, Sophia's 7-year-old granddaughter, and Sophia's 7-year-old granddaughter, when a wildfire destroyed the rental cabin where the family had been living. Sophia explains when she meets with Alice at a Red Cross shelter that she needs to stay in Redwood County because of the custody order she has with the county for Liz. Sophia is a non-needy caretaker relative who only receives CalWORKs and Medi-Cal for Liz. Sophia receives alimony and child support from Courtney's father, but the amount she receives is very low. Sophia needs to replace all of the family's clothing and furnishings. What resources are available to help Sophia and her girls?
and I put this in because there are so many families with disaster-related homelessness in California because of our wildfires and our floods and everything else. So it's important to know about this stuff. And David is our person who deals with our client contact, and so has learned the disaster assistance programs because our clients need them. So take it away, David.
Okay, so there is the primary thing. What I have here, there's 3 links, and I'll put them all in here for disaster relief. There's a few primary places that you're going to want to send people. 2 are for the state, and 1 is, well, there's 1 primary state program and a couple federal programs. I'm putting all the documents here in the chat for us. One second. So if you go to this first link, this HUD link, this is how you find out if your client would even qualify for disaster relief, right? There may be a fire and you think, well, they would qualify for disaster relief. It has to be declared federal disaster. You go to HUD, put in your zip code, and then you are then declared, it's discovered you are in fact in a disaster. Then you go to the CDSS in California, disaster assistance, and that will sort of give you the link to all the different available choices. And this is what is available in California, is the California Grant Assistance for Individual Families. This is a resource and cash grant. And again, you have to apply for it. You can only apply for it if you are in a disaster. The next one is the Individual and Households Housing Program. This is through FEMA. So it's not the easiest thing in the world to get to. Again, there has to be a declared federal emergency to qualify for it. This is basically how to get FEMA funding for, it's vague what you do or don't get cash assistance for, as a lot of these programs for. But there should be to help you get housing, should be helping restock your house, right? If your house and everything in it burnt down, you should be able to get aid for housing and aid to actually replace what was lost. Then there's the California State Supplemental Grant Program. This will be easier to get than through FEMA because you're talking to the state. And this is local. Again, it has to be declared a federal disaster to qualify for this. But this would be the one of the first steps you should do is try to get them to apply for the supplemental grant. And it's just a basic cash grant to get you through the week. And then disaster unemployment is the other real primary resource. And that is if, of course, you've lost your job because of a disaster. Then you can apply here. And I have not worked with anyone that actually applied for it, so I don't know exactly how the disaster unemployment system works. I'm assuming it's as good or bad as the standard unemployment system. But presumably it is sped up because there's a disaster they got to resolve. Yeah, so that would be the primary things for disaster relief. If you have any questions, go ahead and lay them on me.
There are no income related restrictions to this type of relief, are there?
It doesn't seem to be. From what I can figure out, no. It seems it's entirely circumstantial, right? You have to prove there's no income test that I can see. You have to prove a loss of income for some things, but it is not, they're not income based as far as I can tell. It's situationally based. And it
Got it.
always, even if it is or isn't, just apply for every damn thing.
I also wanted to ask if there were any like immigration status restrictions on this kind of relief.
Not that I'm aware of. There may or may not be, but I haven't come across anything about that. In the California programs, I doubt there is at all. With FEMA, I don't know, because that's a whole different nut to crack. But with the California programs, generally they generally disregard that for assistance for need.
Any other questions? Thank you, David. And like I said, he's our maven on this stuff. So next slide. So we're wrapping this up, and the summary very simply is the types of programs are insurance versus welfare benefit. You want to take a look at the populations and the types of programs that are intended to serve them. And then the program types are emergency, like the disaster assistance, immediate need, which would be something like general assistance, and then short-term and longer-term benefits based on what does the household need, what does the individual need, what are the resources that are available for them. And again, you want to identify specialized programs and resources for various populations. This was a different way for me to organize this training than the way I would have thought about it 10 years ago. And you also want to work to develop relationships with other entities and supportive allies. So if you're dealing with someone who's been homeless in the long term, that may be a different set of resources than with someone who is relatively new to homelessness or for whom homelessness is situational. For example, they just got released from jail, but they have not been restored to parental custody of their children. So they need something to tide them over until they get their children back and can go back on CalWORKs. So, it's very individualized, and yet it really focuses on what's the population that this person falls into, what are the resources that are available for them. Any other questions?
I do have one. So I have been working with some clients who they qualify for general relief and they're considered unemployable for the purposes of general relief, but they have been on GR for a long time without being able to successfully get SSI.
Okay.
What are the factors that would lead somebody to sort of fall into that situation where they're long-term GR recipients and can't, for whatever reason, get their benefits through SSI?
Okay, that was the population that I worked with when I worked for Legal Services Northern California. And Placer County, which is just north and east of Sacramento County, has an interesting history. It was the site of a state mental hospital. And so there were a fair number of people who had mental impairments that didn't either didn't get treated or hadn't gotten treated, but the motivating issue was the county could no longer afford to care for these people, and this was before the ACA. And so the county paid our legal aid office to get people on SSI. So I would say the first thing is, are these people applying for SSI on their own, or do they have an advocate? You might check in your community to see if there is an organization or a group of people, attorneys or advocates, who will represent SSI applicants. One of the things that people do not realize is that if you retain an attorney to represent you for Social Security, that attorney can't charge you. They can only take money out of your back pay. There are people who do that. I have a friend that, that's his practice. You don't make a lot of money unless you do a lot of those cases. And it's a difficult client population. But if you can get them the assistance to support the application, that can make a big difference. The other thing is, a lot of times people are not connected to Social Security, although they actually are eligible. And that's where actually sitting down with them and getting the names of their spouses, interestingly enough, getting the names of their parents and family members. At least once a year, I would have a client who was actually eligible for Social Security because of a childhood disability from a parent, and nobody had linked them up. So, it can be very challenging, but often if somebody's been on SSI for 3 to 5 years, there's probably some eligibility down there. And it's just a matter of getting them linked back into the system and then really pushing that case with all the energy you can bring for it. I had a client who, I love telling this story because it's just so funny. This was a guy who was working. He had issues with IV drugs, but he was working, and he was in a car accident. He was in an accident. Basically, he should have been killed, and he survived. And the county was desperate to get all of the money that it had put into his care because of the way he was injured. And he did fully recover, but he avoided me like the plague. I had a relationship with the administrative law judges at Social Security because I'd been doing cases with them for about 5 years at that point. And so I can't find my client anyway, but I put together my brief and my client doesn't show up. And the judge goes, "Okay, Daphne, tell me about this guy." I explained what was going on. And they said, "I'm pretty sure he's gone back to work." And he said, "Okay, so we give you 18 months close period benefits." And I said, "That would be fine. Yes, let's go back, put it on the record." I come back out in the lobby, and there is my client bawling his eyes out. And I go, "I got you 18 months close period benefits." He was eternally grateful. So, these are frustrating cases. Often they're frustrating clients. And there were some people, it took me 10 years to get the benefits, but you just kind of have to push. Anything else? Okay. All right. David, are there any more slides?
No, no. There's just a time for question and answer if they have it. I don't know if that's Yeah.
Okay. All right. I did promise to tell this story about my Section 8 client who literally I had to go to hearing. She was the drug court nightmare, and the drug court program decided that they were going to give her shock therapy, but they didn't do any follow-up before they threw her into rehab for 3 weeks with no communication. And that impulsiveness on the part of the program meant that her 4 kids didn't have a mother in the house with them. And there was a 16-year-old who was kind of running things, but the house came under the scrutiny of a very severely mentally ill person who started badgering the children. So the children decamped to another location, and that mentally ill person proceeded to move into their home. The Section 8 program treated this as if my client had voluntarily given up her home. Eventually, she was reunited with her kids, but by then she had lost her Section 8 voucher. I went to hearing, lost the hearing, so I filed a writ. And much to my surprise, the first phone call I get from the AG's office was, "You want to settle this? Because we shouldn't have done that." It's like, yeah, I really would. So where are you going to put my client back on the list? And I got them to put her back near the top of the list so she could get her home back. But that is why it's so important for these agencies that are working with families to really work with the family before you get all high-handed and throw somebody off a program. Okay. Anything else? David? Well, thank you for coming. And we will probably try to do this again in January and see if we can do it with the shelter component as well, because I do think this is useful. And I thank the 2 of you very much, and the 3rd person who was with us for joining in. So
Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Please fill out our survey, and if you know anybody who wants to get this information, let us know, and we will try to reschedule it for some time in mid-January.
And we can also at request, we can do trainings for organizations, just FYI. So if your organization wants a version of this, just reach out to us. We can directly do it to you guys.
Thanks.